All right, let's dive into the world of speech and language assessment for young kids. If you've ever found yourself worrying about your child's communication, wondering if they're on track, then this is for you. We're going to demystify the entire process step by step. So to get us started, let's talk about a little boy named Connor. As he was getting close to his 3rd birthday, he still wasn't really talking, even though other things like walking were coming along just fine. And his situation, well, it's a puzzle that so many parents find themselves trying to solve. And that brings us right to the heart of it, the big question that keeps parents up at night. Is my child just a late talker, a delay, or is there something more going on, a disorder? And figuring that out, well, that changes everything.
Yeah, this quote just nails the dilemma, doesn't it? Connor's parents, his whole team, had to figure this out. So what do? Do you diagnose the disorder right away, or do you take a wait-and-see approach and just hope his speech catches up on its own? This is exactly why getting a thorough assessment is so incredibly important. So, how do we get from that moment of worry to a real concrete plan? Well, we're going to break down the whole journey. We'll cover why we assess language in the first place, what clinicians are actually looking for, the tools they have in their toolkit, and how they turn all those clues into a plan to move forward.
Okay, so before we even get into the actual tests and activities, it's really helpful to understand some of the lingo. Clinicians use a few key terms that might sound kind of similar, but trust me, they describe very different parts of the process.
Everything kicks off with what's called an appraisal. Think of this like the 30,000-foot view. It's that first, really broad investigation to figure out, hey, does this child need any kind of help at all? It's the starting point for everything. From there, we move to the assessment, and this is where the clinician really puts on their detective hat. This is the hands-on part. They're collecting data from all over the place, talking to you, the parents, looking at reports, just watching your child play, and yes, doing some formal tests. They're gathering all the clues. And all that detective work, all that data, it leads to the evaluation and, finally, a diagnosis. This is where they put all those clues together to give a specific name to what's going on. And that diagnosis, that's what ultimately determines if a child is eligible for services.
Now, here's a really crucial point. Assessment isn't just a one-time thing. It actually serves 4 different purposes. It starts with screening, just to see which kids might be at risk. Then, it establishes a baseline, a clear picture of their strengths and weaknesses right now. From there, it helps set really specific goals for therapy. And finally, it's used over time to measure progress, to make sure what we're doing is actually working.
Okay, so we know the why. Now, let's get into the what. What are these clinicians actually looking for? And I'll tell you, it is so much more than just counting how many words a kid can say. They break language down into 3 big domains. First up is form. Think of this as the how, the grammar, the way sentences are put together, the speech sounds. Then you've got content. That's the what, the vocabulary, the meaning behind the words. And third is use. This is the why, the social side of things, like knowing how to take turns in a conversation. But a really good, thorough assessment doesn't just stop with language. Clinicians also dig into what they call collateral areas. These are other critical pieces of the puzzle that support communication. For instance, an oral motor exam is a must. The clinician will take a careful look at the child's mouth, the tongue, lips, teeth, the roof of the mouth, to make sure there are no physical issues that could be making it hard to produce speech sounds clearly. It's all about ruling out physical barriers.
And this next one is an absolute non-negotiable rule. Every single language assessment has to include a hearing screening. You just can't separate hearing from language. If a hearing problem goes unnoticed, it can have a huge impact on development. So this is always a mandatory first step.
It's so important to remember that assessment is a team sport. The clinician almost never works alone. You might have an audiologist for hearing, a psychologist for cognitive skills, an OT. But the most valuable player on that team, the MVP, it's always the family. Parents and caregivers are the true experts on their child, period.
So, how do all these team members actually gather the information they need? Well, clinicians have a whole toolkit filled with specialized methods and procedures that help them get a really complete picture of a child's abilities.
And this toolkit is pretty diverse. It's got the formal, standardized tests that compare a child to their peers, sure, but it also includes things like detailed interviews with parents, customized activities to look at specific skills, just plain old behavioral observation, and even something called language sampling, which can be as simple as just recording the child while they play. When we talk about those standardized tests, this is probably the image that pops into your head, the bell curve. It's a really simple way to see, at a glance, how a child's performance compares to a huge group of other kids their age. You can see that most kids score right there in the middle, and this helps us see if a child's score is statistically meaningfully different from the average.
Now, this brings us to a super important point about test scores. Clinicians use what are called standard scores to make a diagnosis. Why? Because they're the ones that show if a child's skills are significantly different from their peers. Now, you might also hear about age-equivalent scores. These are not for diagnosis. All they do is say something like, your child is performing like an average 2-year-old. They're useful for discussion, absolutely, but only after a diagnosis has been made using those standard scores.
All right, so all the detective work is done, all the clues have been gathered from that big toolkit. The final step is putting all those puzzle pieces together. And this is not just about getting a label. It's about creating a clear picture and, more importantly, a roadmap for what comes next.
All that assessment data helps the team figure out a severity rating, from mild to profound. A mild disorder might have some impact, but won't stop a child from participating in things, while a profound disorder means they need a whole lot of help. And this rating is absolutely key for deciding what to work on first. And to get to that final diagnosis, clinicians follow a very logical, evidence-based process. This decision tree is a fantastic visual for it. It shows how they move from one question to the next, weaving together all the information they've gathered to rule things out and land on the most accurate conclusion.
And that brings us to the whole point of this entire process. An assessment is so much more than just a label. It is a detailed roadmap. The final report should give you specific recommendations, clear goals for therapy, and even suggestions for the best methods and activities to help that child succeed.
You know, understanding how this all works is incredibly empowering. It takes that worry and uncertainty and turns it into clarity and a real plan of action. It provides the answers needed to create a path forward, making you the most effective advocate your child could ever have.